Hello and welcome to Alternatives, the access venue that showcases the work of creative people in our local area. I'm Al DiGiacomo, your host for today's program, and joining us once again is author Ron Felber. Ron has written 5 novels and 3 nonfiction books, including Searchers, A True Story, and The Privacy War. Ron received his Bachelor of Arts degree at Georgetown University and his master's degree from Loyola College in Chicago. Ron was the winner of the UPI Press Award for Short Stories in 1969 and is now the president and CEO of Chemitol Okai, a specialty chemical company in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. In his latest book, Il Dottore, A Double Life of a Mafia Doctor, Felber documents the parallels of 3 distinctive American figures from the Bronx: John Gotti, former boss of the Gambino crime family; Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York City; and Il Dottore, known in the book as Elliot Littner, former cardiac surgeon from Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Il Dottore is a fascinating look into the double lives of those who live life on the edge. Ron, welcome back to Alternatives.
Good to be here, Al. Thank you.
Ron, where did the idea for Il Dottore come from?
Well, actually, I was doing a research for the Privacy War, and one of the things, this was about Neil Gallagher, a congressman, and one of the things that he was brought up on charges for, they turned out to be false, was that he was a member of the mafia and cooperating with the mafia. So in the research, the family that they associated him with was the Bonanno crime family. And so I had an opportunity to go to Arizona to do research and to meet with Salvatore Bill Bonanno, son of Joseph Bonanno, the famous commission founder, along with Salvatore Maranzano. And Bill Bonanno was a good interview. He, of course, told me that Neil Gallagher had nothing at all to do with their family and they had a good laugh about it. But one way or the other, through the course of that, we became friends. And we talked on the phone. He was a writer, too, and had published a couple of books and was working on some projects. I was as well. And as a result, we developed a kind of friendship. And I think once a sort of trust level developed, he said, you know, I think you're a pretty good writer, and I like you. There's a friend of mine who is willing at last to tell his story. And this was the physician to people like Paul Castellano, Carlo Gambino, John Gotti, and others, who led a double life. And this was a secret life that he kept to himself for many years, but he's willing to talk about it now. Would you be interested in writing that?
Piqued your interest?
Well, frankly, you know, my first cut at it was who wants to read another mafia book? You know, am I going to write a better book than Mario Puzo's The Godfather?
Right, yeah.
Am I going to write a better book than Joseph Bonanno's book, A Man of Honor? And the answer was no. But the better question was, can you write a different kind of book about the mafia? And that's what this is. Il Dottore is an insider's view from a fellow that's Jewish, for one thing, and that like a normal fellow, you, me, or the next guy, was brought into this world. And so he sees it through eyes like you and I might. And some things that people become used to, let's say, over the course of things, if you grow up that way, are kind of horrifying in a way to somebody from the outside that's pulled in. So it's a very unique point of view, sort of a tour through a house of mirrors, let's say, that is the underworld.
So he's growing up in the Bronx, and he's growing up at the same time as Rudy Giuliani and with John Gotti. I guess they're not peers, and they don't know each other at this point in time. But there were some early points inside the book about his days as a child in the Bronx. Can you elaborate on the first act of violence that Elliot Littner witnesses?
Sure. You know, his father was a dry cleaner, and these were, you know, immigrants from Russia, Kiev, Russia. So they left, really chased out of Russia by the Socialist Party at the time, when there was a revolution going on, and Jews were really a kind of genocide was going on in Russia, so they had to escape. They escaped to America and had a deep love for it. The father was ran a dry cleaning outfit. And actually, they were so poor that they used to call them the Swiss Alps, but there were hills in the back that were the garbage dumps. And so they'd take boxes, and they'd slide down them on sleds, and they called it the Jewish Alps. Well, in the back there, a lot was going on in the Bronx and Brooklyn at that time with organized crime, guys like Lucky Luciano, Salvatore Maranzano and others. And it was a real breeding ground for gangsters, Brooklyn in particular. So there was not unheard of to see a gangland murder, but it was unheard of for a little boy playing cops and robbers with his brother to go into the backies and witness a mob hit, where two fellows kill somebody and then take a large rock and crush the skull just for good measure. The boy is watching. The two hoodlums turn around and see this young child. And the guy takes out $20 and hands it to him and says, "You didn't see nothing, did you, kid?" And Elliot Littner, a young boy at the time, says, "No, I didn't see nothing."
So he kind of got the idea, his first little taste of what it is to earn a quick buck.
He did, and he also developed a reputation, and this is key to organized crime, to the mob, and it's also key to this story. But what happened was he didn't tell. The police came, asked him questions. What did these guys look like? What kind of car did they drive away in? And he wouldn't talk. And oddly enough, because the mob was so integrally tied to Brooklyn and the Bronx at the time, almost like the Catholic Church was tied to this immigrant population. Sure. It was part of the culture. He was greatly admired, not just by the other kids, but was greatly admired by their parents, many of whom were in some way maybe a numbers runner or something to do with organized crime, so that he developed a reputation as a kid who could be trusted.
Now, he's going to school. He's a bright individual here.
Elliot Littner, I mean, I got to know him well. I had, many hours of tapes where we went through his life story. He took me to where he grew up, to the backies, as a matter of fact, and, of course, to the hospitals that he worked at. And an extraordinary fellow, brilliant, the youngest fellow to graduate, at least at that time, ever from downstate medical school, and a brilliant kid that was recognized. And really what happened, because he was sort of a scrawny, brainy kid, he was getting beat up all the time for his lunch money and whatnot. So either he was smart enough or they were in need enough, but one way or the other, the sons of these hoods said, we need some help with homework. We need our papers written. If you do that, we'll make sure you never get beat up again. And so kind of a symbiotic relationship developed between Elliot Littner, and who was brainy, and his brawny mafiosi counterparts. And that relationship started early and then just developed in a very natural way.
Just hanging around with the guys in the neighborhood, right?
Isn't that true? You really become who you're around, I suppose.
Like a goldfish, you become part of your
environment,
your little bowl there.
Absolutely.
So he's going to medical school. He decides to become a surgeon, and so I guess the people that he knew throughout his life, he still knows as he's going to school.
Yeah, this is the way that kind of goes. Because he's a brainy kid and takes school very seriously, he's studying all the time. He loves things like mathematics. He loves the sciences. And these guys love women and fast cars. So there's a little bit of a juxtaposition here. But he also knows, and in the book I compare it to sort of the Nutty Professor with Jerry Lewis, where on the one hand he's buddy love. When he hangs around with these guys, he's a cool guy. He's in the Corvettes with them. If they're around girls, he's around girls. If they're in nightclubs, he's around in nightclubs. If they're cool, he's at least tagging along with them. On the other hand, he has skills that they don't have. And if you think about it from a mob standpoint, having a friend that's a doctor isn't the worst thing in the world.
And when was it that his services started to become needed?
Yeah, it was interesting. And again, it's like water, elevating by degree. I'm pretty sure, to get inside his skin for a minute, Elliot Littner's, I don't think that he had some climactic event that changed his life. The water got hotter and hotter, and he acclimated with it, never felt it, until it became a boil. And really, the first couple of things that happened were that he was asked. The first was that he was asked to, as a resident, to open up a string of illegal abortion clinics. This was prior to Roe v. Wade,
It's years before.
Many years before Roe v. Wade. And actually, there's a kind of convenient morality, a kind of convenient logic to all of this. But Neil Delacroix, who is wound up being underboss for the Gambino family, approaches him and says, there are a lot of women, young women, that have unwanted pregnancies. They have these abortions, either they do it themselves, which is catastrophic, or they have some butcher do it that is unlicensed, or somebody that is licensed but in unsanitary conditions. From a humanitarian standpoint, and also, by the way, you'd make more than a few bucks on it, we would like you to recruit residents from Mount Sinai to perform these. And these were great businessmen in a lot of ways, because they had these gambling joints set up straight along the way for numbers and whatnot in all of the neighborhoods.
Right.
So this is like points of distribution.
Yeah.
So they turned the back of these into very good outpatient surgical centers, the back of the bookie joints.
And there are people who know how to keep quiet.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to find out about what's going on.
La Cosa Nostra, it's our thing.
Absolutely. So they must have made money hand over fist.
Well, actually, they couldn't deal with the demand. And you have to realize, if it's illegal, this is something where there are wealthy women, poor women, middle-class women, women in desperate trouble,
Sure.
etc.
Yeah.
So they're willing to pay almost anything, and the mob is willing to take almost anything. But what they did give in return, and this is something that you have to look at if you're going to look at the whole picture, they did provide professional doctors. They did provide an environment where infection wasn't going to happen, and these women were taken care of.
It was safe, it was clean.
It was safe,
yeah.
It was clean. And in an odd sense, Carlo Gambino maybe said it best, we're not bad guys. We don't do bad things. We just give people what they want.
A strange thing about it that in 1973, the government got into the abortion business and took it away from the mafia.
Well, actually, one of the interesting conversations I had with Bill Bonanno was about just that, about gambling, which was the mainstay, loan sharking, gambling, the mainstay of the mob. Also, then, of course, you would have to include in that theft, hijacking. You would also, which John Gotti was a master at. He was a master hijacker from Kennedy Airport.
That was his thing.
The other thing they got involved in with great success, of course, is counterfeiting stocks and bonds, counterfeit stocks and bonds, manipulating the stock market, very heavy into that. And even to today, these things are ongoing
Sure.
enterprises. And of course, really the bane of the organized crime, which was drugs, cocaine and heroin, and really caused a huge rift in between the traditionalists and the more modern branch of the American mafia.
What are some of the difference between the Sicilian and Napolitano gangs?
Well, I'll tell you what, the best way to illustrate that, I think, and some of these figures are very well known, like John Gotti, and I think probably Carlo Gambino is very well known, so let's use those two. Carlo Gambino, Joseph Bonanno, come from the Sicilian branch. This was from the undertakings primarily of guys like Salvatore Maranzano, who spoke fluent Greek and fluent Latin. This was a great scholar. This is not a stupid man. And so what he did was devise, this was the Sicilian end, the thinkers, the low-key thinking men that strategize. Like corporate strategy, even to the point where they developed, based on Caesar's empire, the Roman Empire, the commission. And rather than have people fight and butt heads, this is my territory, no, it's yours, go back and forth about the rackets and whatnot, Maranzano looked at history, and Caesar in particular, and developed the commission. And the commission was the 5 families, and that the idea was, this is your geography. This is your geography. This is your world. If I'm one of the godfathers and you're a godfather, we meet in the commission and discuss our differences. But there is never any question about who runs Chicago. There's never any question about who runs Miami. There's never any question about the 5 families and their geographies in New York. and this keeps peace. And as a matter of fact, it was called the Bonanno Pax, P-A-X, the Bonanno Peace, and it led to an unprecedented period, something like 40 years of peace without wars.
Extreme wars. You always had little.
That's right.
Little squabbles and things like that. Someone would wind up getting murdered or for not doing something, but not the growing pains.
Not the bloodbaths that were witnessed at different points in time. So that was the Sicilian view of things. Now, the other side, those from Naples, which John Gotti was, his hero was Al Capone. And you don't have to know too much about Al Capone, except a couple of things, and the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is certainly one, where Bugsy Moran witnessed it, and the police said, you know, who did this? And he said, there's only one guy that kills like that, Al Capone. Now, the people from Naples, that branch of the mob, was just the opposite of the Sicilians. The Sicilians really looked down their nose at it. So a guy like Gotti, Capone, violent, rash, not very strategic, very capable of starting huge wars and feuds. Even the way they dress. A guy like Carlo Gambino had a residence in a row house in Sheepshead Bay. I've been by it. I mean, you would think the fellow that lived there, you know, maybe
attract no attention.
Attract no attention. Yeah. But this fellow's a billionaire, not even a multi-millionaire, a billionaire, and yet dresses in poverty. Humility is a great aspect. I was in Joseph Bonanno's house. I think I probably did, if not the last interview, one of the very last interviews with him at his house in Tucson, Arizona. He's 96. And he had pictures of the famous people that he knew, very, very low-key. I mean, it would be the kind of house you would think clearly a blue-collar working fellow would have, and no more than that.
Did both of the mobs, the Sicilian and the Napolitano mobs, disdain the thought about getting into the heroin trade?
No, actually, it's not quite. The division was a rift within families. So, for example, Carlo Gambino was the founder of the Gambino crime family, fine. But after that came Paul Castellano, who married into the family, and after that was John Gotti. So this rift was internal within a given family. The Gambino family is a very good example, where you had the Gotti types in the end, the Ruggiero contingent, Sammy Gravano, Sammy the Bull. These are the violent sort of fellows. But they were living side by side with Paul Castellano. And in the end, the Gotti faction won. The Napolitan faction won over the Sicilian faction out of sheer violence and will and audacity.
Let's get back to El Dottore,
Sure.
Elliot Littner. So how is he servicing these, I hate to call them mobsters. I'm Sicilian myself. So I'm trying to find a lighter way. How did he tend to these gentlemen?
Well, I mean, this is the way I think these things work. It's about favors. There's nothing very sinister about these things in the beginning. So if somebody does you a favor, you're prone, out of politeness, I suppose, to do a favor back. But the favors elevate, they escalate. And in Elliot's case, what started out as still something wildly illegal, a string, a massive string, through Manhattan, through the Bronx, through Brooklyn, through Queens, all through New York, of illegal abortion clinics. But then when people needed to be helped, let's say that a mobster was shot, which was still happening, he was shot by a cop, shot in any way.
There's tricks of the trade.
Absolutely, it's a violent business. Yeah. They would go to him, they would ask for him, and bullets would be removed, and if police needed to be contacted, they weren't necessarily contacted. If medical records show that there was a gunshot wound, they would not necessarily stay.
If they had to go to a hospital, if he had to go to a hospital and use the facilities there, what would he do with the admitting records and
Well, these guys would be admitted under a different name, and then the file would just find its way into a waste paper basket, I would imagine.
Oh, is there a penalty?
Along with the lead from the bullets.
Is there a penalty for that?
Is there a penalty?
Is there a penalty for absconding with medical records?
Well, there's certainly a penalty in the sense that you're getting away, you're getting yourself deeper and deeper in with the
Right.
mob. Now, what
Yeah.
they returned to him was gambling. He was an inveterate gambler. He would gamble tremendous sums of money in Las Vegas and in Atlantic City, and he would be guest of the house. He would know all the entertainers. He would be a big shot at
The high roller.
High roller at the Studio 54. He knew everyone. He was swinging with Andy Warhol and Cher and you know, all the stars of that age, Burt Reynolds, on and on.
And at this point, what is he doing as a cardiac surgeon?
Well, actually, this is a fellow that is driven. And maybe it has to do, we can get into the psychology of it, which I do in the book, maybe a little later. But this is a driven man and obsessive. Probably if you're a gambler that gambles like that, I mean, you know, $100,000 in a weekend, this is not normal. This is an obsessive behavior. He was obsessive about learning. He's published, I have his resume, I think he's probably published 100 papers. He's won all kinds of awards. He's developed surgical techniques that were breakthrough surgical techniques in heart surgery. So this is an extraordinary fellow, obsessive about his work and obsessive about his vices.
Now, didn't he also get a little assistance from some of his friends in high places on getting things published? And
Well, no, I think from the medical side of it, he was just a brilliant guy, and so this is something that he earned straight along the way. Now, another way, let's say, that he was repaid, there was a board member of Mount Sinai, this would be Al Rosengarten, and that's a real name, and Mr. Rosengarten was an affiliate, let's say, of the Gambino crime family, and so he really had a special liking for Elliot, and Elliot was on a fast track to replace Dr. Dack at the time, who was director of cardiac surgery, and ultimately he wound up getting to the position before his catastrophe. He wound up getting to the assistant position under Dr. Dack, and was his heir apparent when he had to leave New York under some rather strenuous circumstances.
I find it to be amazing to have that much kind of stress as a doctor, as a surgeon. You're operating on probably the most vital organ inside the body, the heart, and carrying on that type of a double life, just as the title implies that you're in Atlantic City. You're, you know, the life, the adrenaline, and there's only so many hours in a day, Ron.
No, that's a very good point. And look, I'm not here to say that this is a role model for anyone. Okay?
We're not here to judge.
This is a fellow that would party at Studio 54. He loved women, and Plato's Retreat was a place you know, where he took them on maybe 2 and 3, 4 at a time. So this is all about excess in a lot of ways. And certainly, if you look at it, he partied with a fellow named Frank Silvio, and these were buddies, another surgeon.
He was another surgeon, right?
Yeah. But I mean, let's to be frank, you're right. I mean, you would have to be hard pressed to imagine a guy partying till 4 or 5 in the morning, and then getting up for work, and probably not going to sleep at all, going to work maybe at 7 or 8, and performing 5 thoracic surgeries.
Now, the book addresses that some of the other of his associates were into amphetamines, were dabbling in cocaine, yet Elliot shied away from.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing. You know, from personality standpoint, it's just quirky, I guess. But his idea of a drink was Diet Coke. I mean, this is a fellow that was addicted to Diet Coke. He had nothing to do with cocaine, though it was everywhere. He had nothing to do with heroin, which was making a huge comeback at that time. And by the way, was in great supply among the people that he was dealing with, because many of them were in the underworld, were dealing heroin and cocaine at the time. A lot of his buddies from the Bronx days and the backies, those fellows became, you know, soldiers and higher ups in these various crime families. And really, many of them were addicted to drugs, and many of them were pushers, international drug dealers.
They had gotten so far deep into it that that's where they were supporting their lives, I would suppose.
That's true, but you see, this is another good example of the difference between these schools of thought. The Sicilians wanted nothing to do with narcotics. What really brought, and we'll just be ethnic here because this is all about ethnicity, but basically what happened was the Napolitans felt differently about it. And guys like Meyer Lansky, were into money.
Yeah.
It wasn't about honor the way these old godfathers, the mustache Pete's, looked at it. It was about money. This is a business. It's an enterprise. It's an illegal business enterprise. And they set this up like a giant corporation. So drugs, with the ending of Prohibition, where you had bottles and cases, bulky things, you could bring in China White from Burma through Hong Kong, Thailand to Hong Kong to New York. A stewardess could bring it in her purse, and she could bring in enough pure heroin just in that purse to be worth $500,000. See, it's light, it's easy to carry, it's hard to detect. This was a better deal than Prohibition ever,
but they knew,
booze ever offered.
But the old guys knew that it would bring the feds on them, it would destroy everything. Ron, we're gonna take a little break. When we come back, we're gonna further into the exploits of Dr. Elliot Littner, and we're gonna take a short break now for a public service message. We'll be back in 60 seconds with Ron Felber.
Sometimes the littlest people can get into the biggest trouble. That's when you call the Poison Control Center hotline. For poison emergencies or just questions, get expert help day or night. Call 1-800-222-1222.
If you think it might be poison and you don't know what to do, call 1-800-222-1222.
In an emergency, doctors you've never met will have only moments to make decisions about your care. They'll need information quickly, your conditions, allergies, medications, physician and family contacts. But you may be unconscious or in so much pain that you can't recall critical details, and the risk of complications can increase significantly. Medic Alert provides this information within seconds. Help us help you by wearing the Medic Alert emblem. Call now for free information.
Welcome back to Alternatives. I'm with Ron Felber, author of Il Dottore. Ron, before we went to the break, we were talking about the role that heroin and smuggling had played in the mobsters' lives.
Yes. The point I was trying to make about the rift in the families, if you look at business, organized crime, as a thing of honor, like a Joseph Bonanno, Salvatore, Maranzano, Gambino, the idea that it's about honor, it's about doing favors, it's about a different world. These fellows looked at themselves like presidents or dignitaries from another country, within this country. They were, at a time, were bigger than U.S. Steel. And so they looked at themselves as kind of diplomats, well-educated men. Again, some of them, all of them college graduates, some of them spoke Greek, some of them spoke Latin, some of them were trained in Italian seminaries early along.
Sure.
Now you have this other influence, which is the Al Capone, Naples sort of influence, coupled with the Jewish influence of guys like Arnold Rothstein, who fixed the World Series, famous for that. Guys like Meyer Lansky. And by the way, one of the great criminal minds of all time, Lucky Luciano. And Lucky Luciano said, this is a business, and we're going to run it like a corporation. And he did, and he was chairman of the board. But that created huge tensions. The people that didn't want to get into prostitution, for example, for moral reasons, corrupting reasons, heroin, they knew it was addictive. They knew it would undermine the society, and it would undermine them ultimately.
They knew that it would be a large enough offense. It reminds me of The Godfather. People could deal with gambling, they could deal with prostitution, but drugs, no one was going to really stand for.
Yeah,
and they knew that they knew the whole thing would.
And the other thing too, if you're in fact in a situation where secrecy is everything, you have to have a kind of discipline. If you're like Paul Castellano with 3,000 soldiers on the street, 3,000, this is a large corporation.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, it depends on discipline. And if your fellows are addicted to heroin, and I'm pretty familiar with that these days, what will they do to get money for heroin? They will steal, they will cheat, they will lie, which totally undermines the code of the mafia.
Yes, and it's been played out in many stories with the mafia. Now the book also has a timeline where it draws Elliot Littner and how the mob worked with the government side by side for many years, until the CIA had decided to take jobs in-house. What was happening to Littner at this point in time?
Well, Elliot Littner, at that point in time, there was quite a bit going on with Reagan and the RICO laws. So it was kind of a noose tightening. He was doing these things. He ran up tremendous gambling debts. And the only way to work it down, and I'm talking a lot of money, to work it down was to do things they would pay him for. One of the things, because he was a doctor and giving speeches, lectures all over the world, Geneva, Austria, far and away places, he could go to those places, Brazil, Colombia, arrange to give a lecture because he was a foremost thoracic surgeon and had written so extensively. But he'd rarely be searched. And so what they wound up doing was using him as a courier. And this, again, starts to really get deeper and deeper because now he's entrenched doing illegal things. For example, he gets involved in transporting counterfeit stocks, counterfeit bonds internationally. There's one great scene in the book, I think, where he's supposed to be meeting a particular customs agent. And he gets there, and the customs agent is supposed to recognize him and just let him pass. Unfortunately, the customs agent that he was supposed to meet didn't return from break on time. And this guy starts giving him a hard time, wanting him to open his luggage and his briefcases and suitcases and whatnot, filled in some cases with gems, emeralds, things of that nature. Some cases, stock certificates.
Contraband. It may not
Some
be
heavy
drugs.
duty.
It may not be drugs, but it's all contraband.
And in a lot of cases, he didn't know what he was transporting because he didn't want to know. He just didn't want to know.
Not that that makes it any different.
It doesn't make it any different.
Right.
Doesn't make it any different, but it makes it a little scarier from his standpoint. What's in the box?
Right.
So actually, in that particular scene, he goes into a wild frenzy. How dare you? You don't know who I am, etc.
You don't know who I am.
And creates such a scene. The guy who's on break and sipping coffee goes, "Oh my God," and runs over and says, "I'll take care of this one," and then lets him pass. But here's a guy again, rubbing elbows with Rudy Giuliani at the Waldorf Astoria at fundraisers for the American Heart Association, etc. High socialite. He's married to the daughter of a very prominent obstetrician, Mort Shapiro, and his daughter is a ingenue. And so here he is, tied in to literally two worlds, meeting with guys like Giuliani, politicians, prominent surgeons, guys like, at his wedding, you get people like ex-Governor Carey, Norman Mailer, etc. So, the really prominent
New York
people.
socialites.
New York socialites. And then on the other hand, he is living with the former guys he grew up with, and a lot worse. There's a great story about him first meeting Carlo Gambino, and you asked how he got into this. Yeah. He's doing these kinds of services, but light, relatively light at this point. By that I mean treating a gunshot wound, disposing of some bullets or whatever, not notifying the police. More subtle than later. But all of a sudden, he gets a knock on his door one evening, and some rather large guys with some big gold chains, etc., are knocking on his door, and they say, "You need to come with us." And he's scared of these guys, but he says,
Because he knows the likes of these guys.
He knows.
Sure.
He has a pretty good feel for what's going on. Come with us. A friend of ours, and that's a key word, a friend of ours, is very ill. So he says, "Well, I'll do it tomorrow," or he needs to be taken to emergency. No. You need to come with us now. Il Dottore. You need to come with us now. So he does. He gets into this car, and the guy next to him says, "Put this hood on." And now, you got to imagine a guy who's, again, this is not everyday stuff. He puts on his hood reluctantly. They said, you've got to put on the hood. And they take a ride. He thinks they might kill him.
Yeah.
So he's, who knows what he stumbled onto, who knows what he knows or who he knows. He winds up smelling saltwater air, and he realizes he's near the bay, Sheep's Head Bay. They stop, and they keep the hood on until he gets in the house. They pull a hood out. Often it's an old house, low-key row house. Old woman, very pleasant, very lovely woman, educated again, pleasant, social. This is Mrs. Carlo Gambino. The old man, the godfather of the Gambino crime family, is elderly at the time, call it 76 or so. He has an aneurysm, and basically the only way to check this, they will not let him take him to a hospital because they don't want to show weakness.
Right.
If he's taken to a hospital and sick, that's not a good thing. He'd already had a couple of heart problems.
Somebody's going to move in.
So they didn't want to show weakness.
Yeah.
So they wanted him treated there. So obviously he doesn't know what's wrong, but he looks at him and he sees that this fellow is bloated, that there's this blockage. The only way to, and I'm going to try to be delicate about this, the only way to do that is to insert a finger up the rectum and to feel.
A digital examination.
And to feel. So he puts on his surgical gloves, and he goes to one of these guards. There's 20 men there protecting their boss. And he goes, I know you're not going to like this, but in order to examine, this
His life
man,
depended on
I
it
have to
at this
do this
point.
because I'm afraid this will rupture. And if it ruptures, he'll die. And I need to know how serious it is and how much time he has. So he goes about to do it, and a lot of these people don't speak English. So one guy immediately goes to grab him, and the other guy says, no, let him do his work. And finally, the godfather, Carlo Gambino, says, let him do what he needs to do. But the interesting thing is, because they knew, this is a nice little insight, everybody knew that the house was bugged. The FBI was really crawling all over Carlo Gambino at the time. So they knew his phones were tapped, that there were listening devices undoubtedly. They used sign language. They never spoke a word of English. They used Sicilian sparingly, but mostly it was done in codes and in sign language. I found that fascinating.
I think so too. Any way to get the job done.
I found that fascinating. So he examines him, and then, by the way, he sneaks him into the hospital under another name, assumed name, performs the surgery, and saves Carlo Gambino's life. And by the way, afterwards, this was a key element, too, in his initiation. Carlo Gambino shows the trust level. Carlo Gambino says that the all-important words in this group, we like Elliot Littner. And it's one thing to say, I like Elliot Littner, but when we say we like Elliot Littner, this is the godfather giving his blessing to this man.
You're part of the family at this point. Now, let's get down to the whole crux of the book here.
Sure.
Reagan is president. RICO laws are being ratcheted up.
Yes.
Rudy Giuliani's really trying to carve a name for himself in the late 70s, early 80s. He's going after John Gotti tooth and nail.
Absolutely. This is a lot like, one of Rudy Giuliani's idols. And I think I set this up a lot like that. I mean, because people are who they want to be. You invent yourself in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And John Gotti wanted to be Al Capone. Carlo Gambino wanted to be Salvatore Maranzano. And Rudy Giuliani wanted to be Robert Kennedy, and he wanted to be Thomas Dewey. Now, Thomas Dewey was famous for framing Lucky Luciano for a prostitution business that he had nothing to do with. That's pretty famous. He had witnesses that later recanted and said they were sent on trips and that given no sentences and charges dropped so that they would testify against Luciano. But basically, Giuliani was cut from a school where the end justifies the means. And the end was he wanted to be president of the United States, even then.
The first Italian-American
Catholic
president.
This was a burning desire. And a lot of people were like listening to the Rolling Stones and whatnot in college days. And one of people that would remember, he would be listening to speeches of the Kennedys and studying Thomas Dewey and really looking at how being a prosecutor could lead to public office and a heroic prosecutor at that, to high public office. And basically, a lot like Dewey targeted Luciano, and RFK targeted Jimmy Hoffa. They're famous stories.
Absolutely.
Famous stories about that
Absolutely.
hatred. There was the same kind of animosity between Giuliani and Gotti. They were two guys that were cut basically in a lot of ways from the same cloth. I don't mean to be cavalier about
Sure.
this, but they grew up in the same areas. Rudy Giuliani's father had affiliations with the mafia, and in fact was arrested for armed robbery and served time in Sing Sing for it.
Right.
That's a little known fact.
Now, with the RICO trial, Rudy's trying to get to John Gotti. There is a witness. He's on the stand, Ralph Scopo.
That's correct.
Tell us, really, this is what the whole book boils down to.
Yes, absolutely.
Why don't you take us and really tell our viewers how far deep Elliot Littner gets involved?
As deep as you can get. But I'd like to start a little sooner.
Okay.
And in terms of Rudy Giuliani and how he discovered there was a commission. Now, this was the brainchild, as I said in the previous segment, of Maranzano and Bonanno, this commission, this organization. And basically, Joseph Bonanno was on 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace, I believe, and talked about a book, A Man of Honor, which described the commission. Now, Giuliani, desperate to make a name for himself, is trying to bring down these mobsters, but they're pretty clever. RICO laws now talk about conspiracies. And by the way, my own view of RICO is that it's unconstitutional. Basically, just association with a crime it makes you as guilty as the person
Sure.
that committed
Yeah.
it. So it has to do with right of association and things like that. I think it's incorrect. But one way or the other, Giuliani realized that RICO, the idea of getting people because they knew other people or knew that a crime might happen, even though they weren't involved in it in any way, this was his way of getting the godfathers, who were many times removed, but in some way benefited from the crime. What he had to prove was the linkage.
Right.
And the way he did that was to listen to the interview that Bonanno gave, read the book. He held it up to his wife at the time and said, "I've got it. The linkage is the commission. If, in fact, there exists a governing body of organized crime, for every heroin deal on a street corner, for every murder that's committed, for every conspiracy that happens, every loan shark, if these guys benefit, they are part of the crime and could be prosecuted just as if they committed the murder," on and on. At the time, Ralph Scopo was a capo in the Colombo crime family. He was also president of the concrete union workers. And basically what the commission was getting was a kickback of 3% on every contract over $1 million in New York. Imagine the money involved in that. So in order to get a contract to do work, the Jacob Javits Center, for
Sure.
example, when it was built, in order to get that construction, for every yard of concrete that was poured, the commission would get a 3% override of the total bill. Not a bad situation.
No.
And what Giuliani was able to do was to prove that Scopo, through wiretaps, etc., was shaking down contractors, forcing them to pay this, and that the beneficiary was, in fact, the commission, members of the commission, the RICO conspiracy.
So Giuliani is going to target Scopo.
Absolutely.
And
Along with others.
as our time starts to dwindle here, I really want to start to key in
Fine.
on how this goes in.
What
here.
happens
So
is while
the
he's
key
on
figure.
trial, while Scopo is on trial, he has a heart attack and collapses. Now, there's two schools of thought. Of course, the Gotti school and Paul Castellano, they don't want this guy surviving.
Of course
The
not.
Giuliani school, of course, they do want this guy surviving because potentially this is their key witness. He's the linkage. Where does he wind up? But at Mount Sinai Hospital. And who is the one that is doing the surgery but Elliot Littner? Now,
Let me stop you right now. Oh, this is a fictitious name. Who is Elliot Littner?
who is he?
Who is he for real? obviously this is
He is
not
a
his real
prominent.
name.
He is a prominent surgeon that is leading a successful life and career as a surgeon in the New York, New Jersey area right now.
Can you reveal his name?
No, really the premise of writing this was that he would tell his full story, but that he felt for reasons of privacy that he didn't want to benefit from his notorious past, and that there could be some jeopardy with regard to violations of maybe some medical or legal laws.
We've done our own investigation too before it, Ron, and we'll see if we can have you renege on that by the end of the show. But let's go back to Ralph Scopo.
Well, the fascinating thing is that here is Elliot Littner, and here are guys like Sammy Gravano, literally, and John Gotti, literally, the night before. You know, you're a good guy, we like you a lot, do the right thing.
You're Il Dottore.
You're Il Dottore, you've got a good reputation, we've taken care of you, and we'll tell you, we don't want this guy. By the way, the most fascinating piece, Al Rosengarten. This is a key fellow within the hospital who's affiliated. You know, Elliot, about 3% of the patients that go under surgeries like this die. They don't make it. Maybe Mr. Scopo should be one of that 3%. You know, there are people in Staten Island at Todd Hill like Mr. Castellano that would really like to see him not make it out of surgery. He potentially could be a very damaging witness to us. Then on the other hand, Giuliani, who knew him socially, they had been tracking him too. And an agent, the name escapes me at the moment, but one of the key agents and Giuliani's underlings visits Elliot Littner and says, you know, Dr. Littner, you lead an interesting life. We know about your affiliations and the surgery schedule. We know you're the best surgeon here. Your reputation is impeccable.
Should not be a
but
problem.
I promise you, if Mr. Scopo dies, Mr. Giuliani wants me to let you know you will be the subject of his next investigation.
That's got to make someone perspire, to say
Well,
the
this
least.
is a Faustian deal, and now he has to choose between his Hippocratic oath and his loyalty to the mafia. And this is a very incredible moment in the book. And he knows, by the way, that if Scopo lives, there's a good chance he will die.
And Scopo lives.
Scopo lives. And this is a testimony, and I want to make a point, too, about Mr. Littner, Dr. Littner. Dr. Littner has saved many lives. And I know him. This is a good man. And people make mistakes in their lives, and they live to live productive lives. There's a guy that does 4 and 5 surgeries a day. He saves lives every day. He's a healer, and I know another side of him, and it's in the book. This is a gentleman. This is a man that really, in my view anyway, has his vices, don't we all? Maybe they're exaggerated, but he's done with all of that now, and he is an extraordinary fellow and a good human being.
Doing research on this, I have found out that he had done heart surgery on a friend of mine in town that I know. And he works in a hospital very, very close to us, but we're going to save that for the end here, Ron. Before, you've met Joseph Bonanno, as you said.
Yeah, I did. Right.
Before, and you had and again, you've had the book with Neil Gallagher. What parallels can you draw between the mafia and the hidden agendas of American hypocrisy?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I think drugs is a very good example. Bill Bonanno made an interesting point to me. And, you know, and I understand this is maybe not the most credible source in some ways, but believe it or not, I find him to be a very honest guy in a lot of ways. He said everything we did, the government took away from us. Gambling, drugs, you know, talk to families. Adults are on drugs, elderly people are on drugs, kids are on drugs, Ritalin, Adderall, this, that, the other, Prozac. So that business was kind of taken away. Took alcohol away, took gambling away. And these were the staples. By the way, at the end, they took drugs away because the CIA was using the mob big time to finance secret wars. In Burma, for example, against the Chinese, in Laos, all through Southeast Asia.
Nicaragua, El
on and on.
Salvador.
And they were using heroin. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, I interviewed a fellow who was a West Point graduate whose whole unit was basically loading heroin and opium onto Air America jets at the end. So they used the mafia, but they realized with their own wet jobs, terminations, euphemism for a hit, they could do their own hits. They didn't
Yeah.
need to use the mob. They could transport their own drugs. They had the world's largest airline, Air America and Continental Air Services. So basically, that's when all of this war on the mob happened. It happened when they outlived their usefulness to the government.
So in the end, we have Elliot Littner. We have him failing his friends in the mob. What happens to Elliot Littner after Scopo lives?
Well, actually, because the commission trial went on, and successfully, all of the mafia godfathers from New York, the Bonanno family, the Genovese family, the Lucchesi family, the Gambino family, the Colombo family, all of the families went down. All of the, 100-year sentences. So this was probably the downfall. If there was a moment in history that was the downfall of the mafia, largely based on drugs and not living up to their own code, it was the commission trial. And so basically afterwards, Elliot was was beaten up. His father-in-law was beaten up. He was beaten up. And his wife and children left him for good. When he got back to his house afterwards, a couple of hoodlums, Angelo Ruggiero was there along with others, and he was beaten and said, you will turn in, you will resign your position, and they will be expecting your resignation. They were going to kill you. And Mr. Gotti talked them out of it. He said, you're not Italian, you're not a made man, you've lived your life, but your punishment is you're banished. And so Elliot Littner left the East Coast for the West, headed west, wound up settling in Cleveland for a while, and parts unknown, then returned with a new life, and started a new life, and became director of cardiac surgery at a major hospital.
And I understand that, Ron, I know you're not going to give up the name, but is he part of the dream team at Valley Hospital?
I'm really not going to go down that road. I appreciate the fact you've done the research, but there's a certain kind of commitment that you make, and I don't intend to violate that.
Well,
and as a matter of fact, really, some of the ground rules of this interview, I think, precluded you getting into that, and so I would rather if I'll stick to my word if you stick to yours.
Okay, well then maybe people can read the papers and go to the Barricade Book website, and they can do their own research, and they can put one and one together and come up with two and come up with their own answer and find out who El Dottore is and that he's still around.
Well, I just want to make one thing clear. This is a good man. This is a man that really, this is a story of redemption. And one of the things I really don't admire is when people are branded for life just because of something they did in their past. Al, I'm sure that if you look at your background, or I look at mine, or anybody in the studio looks at their background, there are things they did that they're not proud of. But this is not a one-chance society.
Absolutely. Well put, Ryan. We've all got something that we'd rather not have seen or may not be proud of. But I urge people to do their own research. I was about to out the surgeon here, and I've decided not to.
I don't think that's what this book is about.
I didn't say that it was.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't say that it was, but here again, I know if someone was going to be working on my heart, I'd want him to be getting to sleep at a reasonable hour at night.
We're talking about things that went on in the 70s.
For sure.
Okay, so that's a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Ron, it's been a fascinating book again. I think we're just about wrap it up, but you're going to be working on something new.
I am. Actually, I was just in Burma. I just flew out. I took a trip from Newark to Hong Kong, from Hong Kong to Bangkok, from Bangkok to Chiang Mai, and then I rode with some DEA people to Chiang Rai, and then since the DEA's, the Drug Enforcement Administration's jurisdiction doesn't allow them to go into Burma, I went in with the Foreign Service National to interview drug warlords and to follow the heroin chain right to Chinatown. My new book is about the politics of heroin and the history of heroin with regard to the CIA and secret wars. Yeah.
Very interesting. Ron Felber is the author of Il Dottore, The Double Life of a Mafia Doctor, published by Barricade Books. Ron, thank you again for joining us on Alternatives, and good luck with the book. And to contact us at OKTV, you can do so by visiting our website at www.oktv.org and letting us know how you feel about the program. I'd also like to thank the OKTV staff for their commitment to producing our show, and to Cablevision for the use of their Access Studio here in Fairlawn. Most of all, I'd like to thank the viewers at home for tuning in. I'm Al DiGiacomo. That's all for Alternatives.